What if Bob Dylan accidentally invented yacht rock? That's the possibility we're considering on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hello, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these videos is that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe scenario in which a different set of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I happen to have around the house in order to bring this alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Lay Lady Lay by Bob Dylan, and I tried to reimagine that as a yacht rock song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
Stay, lady, stay. Stay with your man a while. Until the break of day. Let me see you make me smile. His clothes are dirty, but his hands are clean. And you're the best thing that he's ever seen.
Obviously, Bob Dylan's one of the most celebrated artists in all of popular music, and there's been an awful lot of stuff written about him, an awful lot of things said about him, documentaries, obviously the recent feature film, and a lot of it focusing on his early career from his beginnings as a folk artist through to his metamorphosis into a mid-60s rocker. So sort of say from his debut through to Blonde on Blonde, that's what a lot of the attention seems to be focused on, and that's fair enough. That's an incredible run of albums, and even if he just stopped at that point, it would still be a career that people would still be talking about today. But I actually kind of find the next phase of his career to be just as fascinating, really, from the point where he had his motorcycle accident and disappeared from public view for a little bit through into the earlier half of the 70s before his major kind of critical revival with Blood on the Tracks. It went through a really interesting period of kind of constant metamorphosis during that time, which, although obviously, every era of his career has been scrutinized by critics to some extent, it's not really been covered quite as much. I guess immediately following that accident, as he was recovering, the first thing that he was actually recording was the basement tapes recordings with the band, which at the time weren't officially released, although bootleg versions of them did get out. Really fascinating, weird, dark, but quite often funny collection of songs, a lot of which became massive hits for other artists as well. There were just different elements coming in that basement tapes era stuff, reaching back into sort of some kind of quite dark folk and blues roots, all manner of strange lyrical allusions going on. It's quite a weird but evocative set of songs. And shortly after recording all that stuff, he came out with John Wesley Harding, which again is another slight little change of direction. Still using a band, but much more stripped down than what he'd been doing. It's just pretty much bass, drums, and acoustic guitar, a lot of it. Quite sparse, minimalistic songs, loads of biblical references in the lyrics, and again another kind of fascinating oddball album, but not one that tends to be listed in people's kind of top flight of Dylan records, which is a bit of a shame because it's quite an interesting one. And then taking that kind of minimalist country foundation, he then builds upon it with much more commercial country flavors. So you get Nashville Skyline, he's got the pedal steel work, and he's got a set of rather more commercial sounding sentimental songs. Voice changes around this time too, which is really interesting. Starts singing less in that Woody Guthrie inspired nasal twang and affects a bit more of a baritone country croon, which I think kind of confounded critics at the time, but just another part of his kind of constant reinvention, really, I guess. And so it continues. You get the really weird detour of Self-Portrait, which just totally baffled critics. The oddball mixture of covers and weird reworkings of his own songs, just seemingly designed to thumb his nose at people who expected a particular thing from him. There's New Morning, which is a much more kind of commercial proposition, but features some great songs, If Not For You, that kind of thing. There's Planet Waves back with the band, doing some quite gritty sort of roots rock stuff, which I think is a really underrated selection of songs. So it's kind of a little bit all over the map in those years, but it's a pretty interesting ride for him. And I'm sure there's no plans for a second Dylan biopic, but I would personally love to see them do a sequel to A Complete Unknown that starts with the motorcycle accident and then sees Timothy Chalamet continuing to play Dylan through this kind of weird era that follows. The song I chose to focus on this week was Lay Lady Lay, which is from the Nashville Skyline album, which I guess is reasonably well regarded by most critics and fans, although I've definitely seen some people commenting that compared to the stuff he was doing a couple of years earlier, it feels somehow inauthentic. It's not what they expect from Bob Dylan. It's not the true voice of Bob Dylan. But I don't think anyone can really judge that apart from Dylan himself. He's such a complex character, and I think his career is built on so many layers of, I don't want to say artifice really, but so many layers of self-created myth in a way that I don't think anyone apart from the man himself knows what the true Bob Dylan really is. I guess people got really attached to the idea of him as this sort of rugged folk troubadour, and so the idea of him singing pretty country songs in a soft baritone croon just didn't fit with their picture of him. But I mean, who's to say that's not just as authentically part of what Dylan is as, singing The Times They Are Changing? He certainly always loved country music as he always loved rock and roll. His fondness for Johnny Cash is well noted. Grew up with Hank Williams just as much as he grew up with Woody Guthrie, so I think that was as much a part of his makeup, really. And it's a great sounding record. I think the original version of Lay Lady Lay is really just a beautiful record. And I quite like Dylan when he just writes a straightforward song expressing a simple emotion with more focus on the emotion and the melody than these sort of incredibly complex dense lyrics that require literary analysis. There's obviously a great deal of worth to that as well, but sometimes it's just nice to hear him sing a beautiful song for the sake of singing a beautiful song. So the fact that it is just a relatively simple, straightforward song with an affecting, straightforward sentiment in the lyric was one of the reasons why I thought that's a song that's open to being reinterpreted into a different style. One genre of music that seems to have captured the zeitgeist somehow recently, has been discussed a lot, is yacht rock, particularly since the recent documentary that there's been quite a fuss over. It's an odd genre designation, yacht rock. Obviously, it was only applied to any of this music many years after all this stuff's existed. If you don't know, the name's derived from it was a web comedy series based on a parody of a lot of kind of 70s blue-eyed soul and soft rock bands. And I think to some extent, some people have considered it to be a pejorative term. I know Rick Beato did a video after the Yacht Rock documentary came out being very upset about it, thinking it was mocking these performers like the Doobie Brothers and Steely Dan, who were considered to be part of this. Ever since I first heard the term, I think I first heard of it. I've never seen the original Yacht Rock series, but I've heard about it when Katie Puckrick did a documentary about it for the BBC. It feels to me like quite a sort of fitting banner under which to group this fairly diverse, actually, kind of range of acts who seem to be encompassed by the yacht rock banner, in the sense that it's a term that suggests the sort of aspirational, upwardly mobile lifestyle that this music kind of represents for people. I think it's that sort of atmosphere that unites the acts that people consider to be yacht rock just as much as any kind of particularly shared musical characteristics. I guess if you were looking for musical characteristics to point to as indicators of yacht rock, it would be a fairly soul-influenced vocal, heavy use of electric piano, that kind of shimmering electric piano texture you hear quite a lot, jazzy chord voicings, maybe some soft horns in there. The musicianship tends to be very slick, but not necessarily too showy. But I think a lot of the people who are playing this music came from a session background, so it's generally impeccably played and very tasteful. So we're talking acts like the Doobie Brothers, particularly a little later on when more of the hard rock element had left their sound and you're moving more into a sort of gentle soul-influenced phase. I guess you're looking at people like Steely Dan, Hall & Oates would probably qualify, Christopher Cross certainly, and there are loads of other acts from around that era who either exist completely in an area that you could characterize as yacht rock, or who occasionally veer into that. And if you're interested in pursuing it, there are tons of playlists of it on YouTube and Spotify that you can look up. And obviously there's documentaries, as I mentioned, that you can check out to find out more about it as well. So yeah, it's funny. It's become accepted as a genre in recent years, whereas previously the acts who were considered to be yacht rock would have fallen into several different genres. Some of them would have been considered to be soft rock or AOR. Some of them would probably have been thought of as smooth jazz. Some of them might have been thought of as soul, but yacht rock as an overarching banner kind of groups them together. And I truly don't think it's an insult. I know some people suggested that that's the intent, but I don't think it is. I get the impression that even the original show, although it's kind of gently satirizing the people involved, I don't think there was any malice intended in that. Although obviously the term yacht rock suggests wealth and status, I don't think either yacht rock performers or fans have to be in any way actually avaricious or attracted to that kind of ostentatious display of wealth. I think it's more about escapist, aspirational idea of just that lifestyle. It's a fantasy really as much as anything, in the same way that the new romantic movement of the 1980s, although, you know, quite a lot of the people who were involved in that and who were fans of that were actually just kind of working class kids. It's a fantasy of glamour and of upward mobility. It's pure escapism. I think yacht rock kind of serves a similar purpose. So my thought for this week's alternative universe scenario was that in an alternative universe, it's 1969, Dylan's recording the Nashville Skyline album, but he's just not getting the results that he's looking for. He's working with a group of seasoned country players and they're all doing their best, but for some reason the results that are ending up on tape aren't what he wants to hear. So he dismisses the whole band, scraps the tapes, and then hires a bunch of new musicians just looking for something different. So the people he hires, instead of coming from the country field, he's hiring people who have been playing in commercial jazz settings. He's hiring people from soul music, and they come in and they set about just creating arrangements that are going to suit their playing style. And the sound that comes out is this prototypical yacht rock 5 or 6 years earlier than anyone else is really doing it. So he renames the album from Nashville Skyline to Malibu Skyline and launches this in the world. Obviously, it being still 1969, no one's quite ready for that yet, so his fans are disappointed and the critics are confused and it doesn't really land. But it's from that album in this universe that the likes of Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers actually get their initial inspiration. So in this alternative universe, Bob Dylan is unwittingly the godfather of yacht rock. So in order to go about turning Lay Lady Lay into a yacht rock song, obviously my first step as ever is just to take the isolated vocal and drop it into GarageBand, sync it up. There's a little bit of tempo fluctuation on the original, so I had to do a bit of shuffling around to get everything onto the grid. Programmed on some drums. Pretty simple but tasteful, like you might expect a session player to produce for that kind of song. Nothing too showy. I played on some bass. As I've mentioned in a few of these other videos, I'm just trying to get a little bit better at my fingerstyle bass playing, so worked on that a bit, just tried to play quite a nice sort of mobile bass line that moves around a bit, creates a little bit of interest. I should say as well, Lay Lady Lay, melodically it's really simple. The original chord sequence is beautiful, but it didn't sound very yacht rocky, so I completely jettisoned the original chord sequence and added some new chords underneath that I thought were a little bit more jazzy. I'm using a lot of major sevenths, slightly more unorthodox harmonic content under that melody just to make it sound a bit more like it was coming from a slightly jazz-influenced direction. Popped a couple of guitars on just playing the rhythm with a bit of chorus on there. Nothing fancy, just fairly tight rhythmical chording stuff in a stereo pair, and then a third guitar with a very sort of 70s, slightly overdriven, phased sound, just playing some jazzy little kind of lead fills as well, which I thought fitted the tone reasonably well. There's a couple of keyboards on there, which is an electric piano and an acoustic piano, basically playing the exact same thing, just one on either side. And they're doing, again, a bit of that Doobie Brothers slightly bouncy kind of chordal stuff that just drives the song along. And the third keyboard part I added was just a very retro analog synth sound that just does some fills on the kind of little bridge sections as well, which again I thought was a nice kind of period touch. And then just to further cement the kind of soul jazz feel of the track, I decided I wanted to add a few horns. So I've got a trumpet, trombone, and sax on there. Not doing anything terribly fancy, but just some little kind of stabs and little riffs, and then the occasional sustained chord that just sort of pop in and punctuate the song and just add those little kind of soulful touches as well. I mean, GarageBand horns don't sound amazing, but I think used sparingly like that, it sounds okay and just adds something to it. For the video, as usual, I started out by just finding some performance footage. With Dylan, that's actually proved to be pretty tricky because there aren't many kind of good 70s clips of him doing Lay Lady Lay at all. The one that I've eventually settled on is from the mid 70s, so it's not too far away from the time period I'm looking at. But I guess one of the problems with Dylan is that he very rarely does the song in concert the way it is on the record. So that mid 70s arrangement is completely different. If you listen to it, it's a much kind of tougher, sort of more rock arrangement than the original record. He changes the rhythm round. He actually changes quite a lot of the words round too. So it doesn't match up terribly well with the vocal that's on there, but it's the best I could do. Interspersed that with, I found some great footage of the Doobie Brothers, so I co-opted them to be his backing band, synced them up, and then just interspersed a few of the usual mock-up concert flyers and things as well, just to give a bit more of that kind of period atmosphere too. So hopefully that makes Dylan seem a little bit more like an authentic yacht rocker. So I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think down in the comments anyway. If you did enjoy it, please like and subscribe. I always really appreciate that. And also, if there's anything you'd like me to have a go at in coming weeks, any artists you'd like me to take a look at, any genres you'd like me to try my hand at, or any songs in particular you'd like me to tackle, please do also let me know. I genuinely always appreciate your suggestions. But yeah, otherwise, that's it from me for this week. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll see you next time.